habit of talking and not losing the train of thought.
Mm-hmm.
People we teach to be flight instructors, they're trying to do something and explain it at the same time. They get to listening to themselves and forgetting something to do. Or they're trying to do something and they forget to talk. And that's teaching flight instructors how to talk and teach at the same, demonstrate and fly at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So I teach people how to get used to themselves talking. I say, you walk into the car, just as you walk to the car, say aloud, hey, I'm walking to the car, I'm crossing the grass now, I'm coming up to the fence, the door handle's there, I'm going to open the door with my left hand and get in, and you verbalize all your actions, and
So
you get used to hearing yourself do that.
Practice.
Yeah, practice doing it. And I tell them not to do it in a crowded room. They might think you're a little nuts, but so I'm used to hearing myself talking.
Uh-huh.
And it doesn't disturb me, and it shouldn't.
That's good.
But, a good instructor can talk and do all it's saying. Anybody can do that, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Ernest, will we have any phone issues? Phone sound issues?
Phone?
think?
I don't know.
They're pretty.
I'm not worried about a periodic phone.
They're pretty low.
Phone, so.
Well,
And it's right
what
on.
I'm going to do is, there was one very important call that was supposed to come. And
Hello.
I guess you can keep the calls down, and if Jonas calls, I'm out of commission now.
Okay, well, it's after 4, so he's probably not there.
Yeah,
anyway.
he's probably been home for an hour anyhow.
Yeah,
Goodbye.
bye.
My phone's not supposed to ring, and if they do, a little tinkly thing over there.
Okay. That sounds good.
Actually, mine doesn't ring, they just call me on it.
So, yeah, we're going, so.
We're good?
Oh, I can't show you what it looks like, but yeah, we're good.
All right. All right, John, you ready? Ready to start our formal interview?
Yep.
Okay.
I'm just gonna move this thing while you say it. Hello. Say Gene, your date, all that stuff. There you go.
Make sure everything looks
Gotta
good.
make this place look real airplane-y.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. All right. So today is October 25th, 2010, and this is Jean Reynolds, and I'm here today with John Walkup, and this is our municipal Chandler Municipal Airport history project that we're working on today. So what I want to do with when you and I kind of started talking, we originally kind of started talking about your dad a little bit. So I'd like you to go back and tell me a little bit about your family history, and we'll start with your parents. So tell me the names of your parents and where they were from.
Well, my dad was Hoyt Walkup, and he married a gal named Arlene Seipert in Harmon County, Oklahoma in 1921. And they went to grade school and high school together and were together all their lives. And he was the only one of the farm. He was a big farm family. He was the only one that left the farm and went to the big city. And he was in the Air Force, the Army Air Corps at the time, the last 2 years of World War II. That's his graduation picture over there out of the Army Air Corps.
Mm-hmm.
He left the little town, went into the service, and when he got out, he went to Stillwater, Oklahoma, and went to work for then the Oklahoma A&M College, and working at their airport. And from 1946 till 1983, he grew up in the town, running the airport, developing aviation programs, and Oklahoma A&M eventually evolved into Oklahoma State University. I was born in '44, while in his last year in the service. And when I was 3 months old, he took me for a ride in an airplane so he could see how it worked. I don't remember it quite well, but anyhow, I did. And by virtue of that, I grew up literally on an airport, next door, and all of the aviation things that he was involved in. And in Stillwater, graduated from Oklahoma State University. He had a couple of fixed-based operations that did flight training, aerial application, crop dusting, running airports, and I would work at one of them. So I went through college working at one of our operations, fueling airplanes, teaching people how to fly. And for 2 years, I had a mobile home parked on the airport and lived on the airport working there. Graduated from college in '69 and went to work for an aircraft company, Beach Aircraft Corporation. My dad continued to run the airport at Oklahoma State University in Stillwater, Oklahoma, until he passed away in '83. And I have 2 brothers that are twins, and they both got their private pilot certificate. My mother got her a commercial pilot certificate, and we just grew up in that environment. Until I was about 17, the last thing I wanted to do was be a pilot for a living. And one of the chapters in my book, when I ever write it, is how I took my first commercial flight, where I took somebody somewhere and they paid me for it. And I was 18 years old when that happened. And I got back from that. Decided I was going to be a pilot. Here it is, 40 some odd years later, 50 years later, I forget. So that's what brought me to where I am today. In the beginning, in and around aviation, everything about it, live, eat, breathe, and sleep airplanes. My dad was very active in a couple of international organizations. He and my mother, for about 10 years running in the 60s, ran tours of the International Flying Farmer Organization from Oklahoma to Guatemala and back, taking farmers in their airplanes and going down there and coming back. And so he would lead the tours down there. And be as many as 10 airplanes to 20 airplanes, and they choreographed this entire 2 or 3 week trip, flying through Mexico and Central America.
Wow.
And that was part of their involvement with that. He was involved with developing programs for college courses, for college credit training. He was involved with that in the late 50s. He was involved in the early 70s with a regulation which we deal with today, every one of us pilots, in the development of what we call a biennial flight review, a process to have pilots check out each stay current every couple of years. And he was involved with the development of that concept and the laws that got it passed in the early 70s. And he was one of the old guard. There was the whole world we know as aviation developed between 44 and about 75 to 1980. And he was very much involved with that. And so we know lots of people from that, and I grew up in that environment. A neat story, I guess. I grew up in Oklahoma. I started flying when I was 12, got my, I soloed when I was 16, got my private when I was 17, commercial when I was 18, et cetera, et cetera. And I grew up in Oklahoma, going to college there. And after I got out of college, I got married. I was living close by in Ponca City, Oklahoma for a while, and a little while in Wichita. But no matter where I went, within 300 or 400 miles of there, I'd introduce myself to people and I'd say, "Hi, I'm John Walkup." And they'd look at me and say, "Oh, you're Hoyt's boy, aren't you?" I moved to Arizona so I could be me. And not a year goes by. Met a fellow the other day, this weekend. He got his private pilot certificate from my dad in 1967. His dad used to fly with my dad in the late 50s and 60s. And I ran into him down there, and we were talking. He says, "I figured you was Hoyt's boy." So I moved to Arizona, and I still am Hoyt's boy. You keep bringing back some memories.
Well, I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about your dad. I want to start with kind of his World War II experience because I think that's so significant. I've done this Veterans Project where we interviewed people from Chandler who served in World War II. And I'm interested to know a little bit about his experience in the Army Air Corps. Where did he serve in the Army Air Corps?
He got into it right at the end of the war, I would have to get the exactly dates, end of 43 and 1944, right at the end of 43 and 44. He trained, his basic training was in what are called Stearmans, and they flew at Mustang Field at El Reno, Oklahoma, which is about 30 or 40 miles west of Oklahoma City today. And he grew up in that World War II Army Air Corps environment. He flew, I have his original logbook and all his flight times, that he started out in PT-19, then he flew the PT-17, which is a Stearman. He was approximately 23 years old and went in and flew a B-17. He got checked out. He started flying B-17s, B-23s. He flew a bunch of different airplanes as the military guys. People light years from what we do today. He was stateside. He never got overseas. Just before the war ended, he was headed for Greenland, was at Greenland for a little while, flying air-sea rescue with PBY, the Flying Catalina's bomber, the Catalina amphibian airplane. Not much time in it, and about that time the war ended and such. We have home movies at home that were taken with a Super 8 camera that he bought in 1943. He'd wind it up, and it was not Super 8, it was 8mm camera. Wind it up and take pictures, wind it up, take pictures. We have movies of him flying B-24s and B-25s and him standing with a bunch of his cronies around airplanes. And that's been transferred to VHS. And the camera that he had in 43 that he wound up and did it, I have at home. It still works. Just don't have him film for it.
Yeah.
But so he was in the service. When he got out of the service, he became a reservist with the Army Air Corps, and over the next decade or two become the Air Force. And he continued as in the Air Force as an Air Force Reserve pilot. Not a pilot, but in the Air Force Reserve. He went to them for years. And I really don't remember. I think I'd have to look back and see what his final rank was when he got out of that.
Mm-hmm.
But he was in that World War II Indian environment, and everybody got out. And what were they going to do next? And he went to Stillwater, Oklahoma, which was just south of where he'd done some training in Wichita and Oklahoma City. And he went to work for the Ford dealer there as a mechanic. And Oklahoma A&M College was right there at the same place. And believe it or not, right in north central middle Oklahoma, the airport was a Navy airport. And it was a big, wide expanse of multiple runways. And he was it was a Navy airport, and the Navy said they didn't want it, so they gave it to Oklahoma A&M College for a 99-year lease for $1. And Oklahoma A&M in 1945 and 6 found themselves with an airport. My dad was working as a mechanic, and he was the only local pilot. And so a little tail wheel, 2-place trainer the university bought, and he started teaching at that airport in 1946. And over the next 4 decades, they developed flight training departments and up through light, heavier twin-engine airplanes, and developed the airport, developed all these other things that he did. And that era is gone now, along with him and a lot of other people. But he got started in the service. He hung with it till probably in the mid and late 70s, which he officially wasn't in the reserves anymore for some reason. And but everybody knew him wherever he went. And he's currently in the Oklahoma Aviation Hall of Fame, and just made his mark. So.
You said there's a plaque that's at the airport?
At the airport in Stillwater, Oklahoma, he was there, again, a long history of what there, but he, the 3 years after he passed away, the terminal building, which was built in the early 60s, was renovated. And I actually grew up in that dumb terminal building at 9 years old. And I guess it was in the 50s when it was first built. But I grew up in that place, and I saw all the changes that went on with it. And in the lobby of that terminal building today is a big glass case, 10 feet, like 6 feet high, that has pictures of him and other pilots that were at the airport, and all of them's got him in them, and all the old airplanes and all the stuff that was built in them. And the terminal was dedicated officially to him in 86, 87. But right in front of that glass case is a marble, I don't want to say plaque, a marble wall. It's about 6 feet high, about 3 feet long or wide, 5 inches deep, that sits up against the wall in the middle of all of this. And there's pictures of him with his profile and my mother's profile. And they're looking off with an airplane in the background. And one of his favorite poems and saying, way down at the bottom, and a dedication to him, and naming my brothers and I, and my mother thing, and it's dedicated to him.
Mm-hmm.
It's there today. In the last year, we've had people fly to Chandler and get to talking and say, Walkup, Walkup. And I was at Stillwater a while back, and I said, yeah, the plaque was my dad. So, keeps coming back.
Yeah.
So,
It's
I
a-
just moved that. I hope I didn't mess it up.
All right.
That's a really great
You're just
legacy.
playing with it. It's all good.
That's a great
It's
legacy.
it's a great moment for me to move those scissors that I need. Cool, keep talking, everybody.
Okay. The scissors are making a little shadow there. Little funny shadow on there. We had talked initially when we were just kind of conversing there at the beginning about the Flying Farmers. Can you talk a little bit about your father's involvement with the founding of the Flying Farmers?
In 1947-ish, the farming was what it was at the time. And aviation, airplanes, coming out of World War II, was the first small light airplanes where people started using airplanes personally. Prior to that, it was no such thing existed. And being Oklahoma and Kansas and Texas, that all it was farming and such. The farmers were pretty well-to-do people, relatively speaking. Good farmers, good thing. There was a lot of work, a lot of things to do. And they had these big chunks of land that they were farming on. And in Oklahoma, a lot of the people he dealt business with, teaching how to fly. Oklahoma A&M was Oklahoma Agricultural and Mechanical College, so it was an ag school. And as a result, aviation really took off, from what I remember, more in the farming and the rural communities to get around in the late 40s. Anyhow, he and a couple other guys in Oklahoma got together and formed a flying farmer organization for people to get together and do flying and compare notes, but just be an organization. I'm sure there was a lot of capitalism involved in his mind, that he teaches people how to fly and get these groups together. But so the Oklahoma Flying Farmers was founded in the late 40s. It grew from the Oklahoma Flying Farmers in simplest terms to the National Flying Farmer Association. Each state has a chapter, and every year the states there'd be a major convention this state this year, the other state next year. And the organization matured to several thousand members, flying all levels of aircraft, and became probably one of the first major organizations of aviation in that sense. I mean, there are others, but it was very predominant relative to some of the other things out there. The Flying Farmers grew and matured, and almost every state in the Union, except some of the East Coast folk, had a Flying Farmer chapter. And then in Canada, there's a bunch of farming and such going on up there. In Canada, there were some people that joined and set up, and they now had chapters in Canada, and they became the International Flying Farmer Organization. And members that were in the Canadian Flying Farmers, I was mentioning to you earlier, lived over in Sun City up till about 3 or 4 years ago, and the very last one of them passed away. And he had to be in his mid-90s or something like that, from Canada, because they'd come down to Arizona and such, which brought Arizona became pretty active in flying farming, the Flying Farmer group.
Can you
My
talk?
dad, with this group, it began to spread, and through the 50s and into the 60s, it become pretty substantial organization. Their own magazine, they had their own magazine with chapter news and such as that. And I remember in 1959, the national convention was in Fort Collins, Colorado, and that was the first one that I went to, which would have made me 15 years old at the time. Subsequent to that, I was in Seattle, Washington, right after the Space Needle was put up at a Flying Farmer convention. I was in Tucson, Arizona, and grew up in that whole organization. Due to less farming and more industrialized farming and such, the many thousands of farmers have come down. Also, the primary thing is all of this group in the 50s and 60s and 70s have now got older, and they're not active anymore, and there's not much of a generation or two coming up to replace them, as there is in a lot of that kind of stuff. In 1962, we had the International Flying Farmer Organization, and they decided to set up a group on the teen level, teenagers and such. The children are coming up with this group. And so in Oklahoma, we formed the first Flying Farmer Teen organization. And we set the organization up. I was the first Flying Farmer Teen president. We had this, that, and such. So now for the next 10 years, 8 to 10 years, we'd go to meetings, and there'd be the International Flying Farmer Organization, Flying Farmer Organization, and then there were groups of the teen organization, which would do things to work on a little different level. And the organization today is still out there, and but very limited, and I haven't done much with it in quite a while. But it was instrumental in helping spread the use of aircraft in farming and getting recognized in that for personal use and transportation in the 50s and into the 60s.
And you said there was you mentioned a kind of a link between the Chandler area and Oklahoma because of the flying farmers that were coming from this area?
In the early 50s, as the organization developed, 52, 53, and such as that, Arizona being a flying farmer organization, flying farmers out here, they quickly kind of got into that. Over a few years, other states came in. And at the time, in the early 50s, the Knox family here in Chandler, the Sneff family over in Queen Creek, Sossaman Paz, other people around town, became members of that organization in the early 50s, mid-50s. And they all had airports around Chandler and dirt strips and such. But these that group was one of the earlier ones to develop outside of Kansas, Texas, and so on. And so there was a lot of ties with those people coming back to the Midwest and then coming out here to conventions and such. My dad and mother and my family became friends with these people. Mm-hmm. And for decades we all knew each other. They'd come there, we would come here. In fact, having to think aloud, they had the last International Flying Farmer Convention that I could think of was about 6 years ago in Chandler. Hmm. Norm and Barb got all those people down there, and I'm pretty sure that's what it was. And I spoke at that, and I came there and was Hoyt's boy again. Mm-hmm. And so the ties are still there. The Knox family, their son Alex, has been somewhat instrumental in keeping it going as much as he can. And so the Arizona-Oklahoma link developed in the early 50s, and today it hasn't changed. But there's been a lot of changes since. So.
Tell me about your mother, Arlene.
Yeah.
I'm interested in her. We talked a lot about your father. Did your mother work outside of the home? First question.
She, relative to the rest of the world, was a stay-at-home mom. I was born in 1944. She had been from a farming community and married my dad. He ended up in Stillwater, Oklahoma, and I think they were living there when he was down at El Reno in the early 40s. And when I was born, she was 20, I think she's 22 years old, 21 or 22 years old. I'd have to just get the numbers when I was born. And I was born. I was born. But 13 months later, she had twin boys. So she had 3 kids, boys, 13 months apart. And husband, my dad, who was independent, and he was just a go-getter in a lot of ways. He never stopped. And so from 22 to 23 years old, she had 3 kids and my dad to take care of. She never really had a job that she worked. That was a full-time job. Her mother and father lived about 300 yards from us at the entrance to Stillwater, Oklahoma from the north side. He had a gasoline service station in 1951, 49 and 50. First, he was a barber for a while in Stillwater. Then her dad became a gasoline service station owner. Mm-hmm. So they were down on the corner, and her mother and her father were there, and she had 3 sisters. And then my dad and mom were here, and then there was these 3 tow-headed kids. And all within about 5 acres was this clan of people that the airport was over there, the gas station was over there, and the city was right there. So she worked keeping that group together. She worked occasionally at the gas station with her mother and father, but her mother and father worked at the gas station running the general store there for 50 years. Mm-hmm. And so they worked together forever. My mom took care of us at home and became just immersed in aviation because of the variety of people you run into, the people that were coming in. Again, we're talking 50s and 60s. Mm-hmm. And the whole aviation, in the entire United States, there was not more than a couple of 100,000 pilots. And anybody that flew had some inkling of what was going on. And so she grew up in a marriage with this guy's and a very gregarious husband, and meeting a lot of people. And she became the kind of the mainstay as far as keeping things together at home so Dad could do what he did. She met a lot of people. She was very good with them, and so it was complimentary to my dad to get things done. Over the years, she did get a private pilot certificate. She learned to fly in a tailwheel airplane, which is different than people do today. And she eventually got a commercial pilot certificate only because he told her to or made her do it. But he wouldn't train her. She had to train with another instructor because if they got an airplane together, it wouldn't work. And which is academic. You never train your wife or your wife and husband. You never get an airplane together to train. It just doesn't work. So she grew up on an airport with airport people from all walks of life and people coming in. And as these people would come in and grow and develop into other businesses and go into other facets of aviation, we had people all over the world and all over the country in Mexico and Canada that knew her and my dad because this blossoming of aviation. Mm-hmm. And so she stayed home and took care of all of us. One of the operations we had in Ponca City, Oklahoma, she would go up and a couple of days a week and help with the bookkeeping of it. And but she never had to worked outside the house. She kept that up. My dad passed away very young at 59, and went. At 59, he passed away very young, and a very unique thing came out of that. If I back up a little bit, in World War II, my dad and another fellow named Russell were pilots that flew together. All these World War II films I tell you about back then, the two of them are in there all together. Well, Russell had a wife named Mary, and my dad was married to my mother, Arlene, and they grew up together, working together at the airport. And Russell was hardcore heavy airplane and was in the Air Force Reserve for longer than my dad was. And in 1983, when my dad passed away, there was now Russell and Mary and my mother left of that group. About 3 or 4 years later, Russell's wife, Mary, passed away. And 2 or 3 years later, that left Russell and my mother. And 2 or 3 years later, they got married. Anyhow, they had all been together since the late 40s. And they kind of moved on out of that into they got married in 88 or 89. And she continued to go to Flying Farmer conventions, her and Russ, because of Renette.
Hey, John?
Yeah.
Yeah, did you...
I'm busy with an interview.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Goodbye. I'd rather do that. But she was very busy with Flying Farmers. Russell was in Flying Farmers, so they would drive around and go to Flying Farmer conventions and do things like that. And then, so she was involved with aviation all the time after all these years, knew all these people. And about 5 years ago, my brothers, like I said, they're twins. One of them developed Lou Gehrig's disease and died. Mm. And so there was now me, my one brother Jerry, and my mom, and the Walkup family was left. And several other things happened with her health over the next few years, and she passed away this last March.
Oh, really? Mm.
So there's me and Jerry. And both of us are bound and determined to live as long as we can. And so right up until a few months ago, she was still with Russ, and he's now moved down next close to my brother. And you can sit down with him today and ask him about airplanes, and you're busy till dark. He'll tell you about flying airplanes to Germany in 1965, 70, and up in the early 80s, the old big military 4-engine things, and travel all over the world. And you could go through his house and he'd show you stuff that he had picked up. But my mom was with him also, like my dad and with us. She was the catalyst that kept everybody going together. It's a wonder she didn't shoot us at one time or another, but she was a good mom.
Mm-hmm.
So,
That's good. And tell me the names of your brothers again.
Jerry and Terry.
Jerry and Terry. Okay. So you grew up in Stillwater,
Mm-hmm.
correct? And what schools did you attend while you were
Oklahoma
there?
State University.
Okay.
When I started, it was Oklahoma A&M. I shouldn't say that. It was Oklahoma State when I started, but prior to that, it had transferred from the Agricultural and Mechanical College, Oklahoma A&M College, became Oklahoma State University.
Okay. And what year did you graduate from the university?
1969.
Okay. And you said during that time, while you were in college, you had that good story about having a little trailer that was on the airport.
When I got out of high school, I spent a summer in California and come back. And the deal with my dad was he would pay. My dad said you got to have a degree. And we're talking the '60s. That you got to have a degree, and you got a college town right here, so you can go get a degree. And I didn't particularly care to do that, but figured why not. And I figured a C average was just super, which is probably what I had for that length of time. But I got married, getting out of college, my first year at Oklahoma State wasn't too cool. I failed a few hours and such as that, and wasn't that stellar in that sense. And I was having too much fun not going to college. The year after the first year wasn't that successful, I went to a little junior college at Tonkawa, Oklahoma. And it was about 50 miles north of a place called Tonkawa, Oklahoma was the name of the town, but Ponca City Airport was there, and he had an operation there called Universal Aviation. Sold gas, rented airplanes, and typical airport operation. So I went up to Tonkawa, and I spent a year there and got my grades together and started bringing it up. But meanwhile, I was driving back and forth to Stillwater all the time, and I met a girl, and we got married. And now that we were married, we needed a place to live, and I was still going to school in Tonkawa. So there was a mobile home factory on the Ponca City Airport. And we just got in the car and drove down there one day, and we had them build us a 10 by 50 mobile home, and they finished it, and they drove it over, and we parked it right next to the ramp in the hangar at Ponca City. And being as how it was Tornado Alley, we went and put stuff and tied it all down and such as that. And she and I lived there for 2.5 years on the airport. I'd get up in the morning, go open the doors and get the airplanes out. In Oklahoma, every time the sun goes down, you put everything in the hangar, because they'll tell them what's going to happen tonight. Next morning, first thing you do is open everything up and get it out, just like a store in a sense. But I lived there for 2.5 years on that motor home. Well, about a year into that, I was ready to go back to Oklahoma State, so I started commuting back and forth from there. And so I lived in the mobile home, worked the airport in Ponca City, drove down to school, and commuted back and forth for 2 years. And when I graduated from college, I went to work for Beach Aircraft Corporation of Wichita. But I lived on the airport, and there were some real exciting times there with, again, the people. And you live on an airport? Oh yeah, you know.
Okay, before we move into kind of your job there with.
I have to check an audio thing too, so answer this question.
Sure. With Beach Aircraft, I wanna go back a little bit to you as a child, and you're kind of surrounded by you're immersed in aviation basically
Yep.
from day one. You said your first flight was 3 months old with your dad.
Yeah.
And tell me about when was the first time that you learned to, when did you learn to fly?
Well,
Could you, before you answer that, could you rock your chair for a second? I just want to. No, your chair is nice and solid. So, I was thinking maybe it was the transmitter thing here, rubbing on the chair. I hear something squeaky. No, it's fine. It's not really touching. So, and we're running out of power, so it's not like battery chirp. It's only every once in a
to
while.
run out about battery power, so you gotta talk real fast.
No, we're plugged into
No, we're all plugged
electricity.
in, so we're good.
But we're running. Go ahead.
Yeah, the question was, when did you first learn to fly?
Oh, the being growing up on an airport and close to it, and I was always with airplane people and such, so airplanes were just part of it. I wasn't a little kid, but I could reach the pedals and such as that. And I go flying with my dad. I can remember he had what's called an Aeronica Champ, a real small two-place fabric-covered hand-prop start airplane. And the Stillwater News Press was the local paper, and there were several little towns around there called Glencoe and Perry and such as that. And so he and I would get in that airplane, and he had built a chute in the middle of the seats in the back, heat up front and high in the back, and we'd have wrapped up packages of the paper, and it'd be say Glencoe, and it'd say this. So we'd go out there, and he'd go flying it down, and he'd make passes down over the football field at Glencoe, and I would think, throw this thing out, and that's how we distribute papers for Stillwater within about a 40-mile radius. That was flying, but to me, it was just normal, you know. It was just what you did, and just seemed to be a normal way of doing things. And so that was just an example of all the flying was in there. Once in a while, with an airplane to go somewhere, and he'd let me go on the back and stuff. Well, I reached about 10 years old, and my dad said it's time you went to work. And I said, work? You know, I don't remember that clearly, but my first job, we built a house in 1954 from the airport. It was the first big house built in Stillwater. And he had me, and he built it himself. And we used boards for forming the concrete. But when you take the boards down, we'd use the boards to make the floors. So my job was to pull all the nails out of the boards and to use them for whatever we were doing. And I learned a little bit about work ethic right there, or what was expected of you. And at 10 years old, right there, I did that for, we finished the house in 54, so around 55, I was now 10, 11 years old. And the airport is a huge airport with runways running in 5 different directions. Mm-hmm. And it covered about 1.5 mile section of land. And being in Oklahoma, it was just completely covered with grass between the runways. It actually baled the hay from the runways and such as that. Well, when I was 11 years old, he took me out to the airport and gave me another job. And my job was to get on a Massey Ferguson tractor with a mower in the back. And he'd put me on that, and I could just I could reach the pedals. I didn't know how to start it and shift gears, I just knew how to point it. And so he'd get on that thing and put it in low gear and get the mower running in the back, and I'm sitting in the thing steering it. And he'd put it out there, and I'd just drive around these runways, mowing grass. And I would do it for an hour, 2 hours at a time, and then it'd run out of gas. And I'd walk into there, and he'd come back and he'd get the fuel truck. And we'd ride out on the fuel truck that we were fueling airplanes. He'd put some more gas in the dumb thing, crank it up and go around. So I spent a year working at airports, going back and forth with the fuel truck. And obviously every day airplanes were taking off from land, and I was involved with it. So he decided it was time for me to learn how to fly. And so I have my logbook here. I started in, I'm going to say it was April when I was 12 years old. And my birthday's in November, so it was 11 and a half, 12 for you, somewhere in there. And I started flying, and I had all the flying experience by the time I was 13 that normally one has to get a pilot certificate. Cross-country flying, takeoffs, landings, and all that kind of good stuff. But you had to be 16 years old to solo, so I couldn't solo the airplane. So from 13 till I was 16, I would now start flying and going places with my dad, and I could fly the airplane. So I had quite a bit of flight time recorded by the time I turned 16.
Let me
And
pull this straight, I'm sorry. The sun
And,
now is going down.
so I turned 16, and I soloed on my 16th birthday.
Mm-hmm.
And I got my driver's license on my 16th birthday, and that's the newspaper picture.
Oh, is that it right there?
And with the little story that went along with it with my dad. Now I was at an airport, and you got to imagine the high school in little old town in Oklahoma, a junior high school, already had a pilot certificate, and I was flying and taking kids for rides and such. So my junior and senior year in high school, I was the local guru pilot kid. There wasn't any, it was just me, my dad, mom, and we ran the airport and everything. So I got that pilot certificate, and soloed on my 16th birthday, got my private pilot on my minimum age of 17th birthday. And was just in it. Universal Aviation was starting to develop up in Ponca City. And so I was just still in airplanes, and I didn't have anywhere else to go or anything else to do. And my dad was very heavy into education and working at the university and the school and developing programs. He was real good. He didn't say I had to be a pilot. He didn't say I had to have a college degree. He said, you should, if you want to be a pilot, you can be one. In education, you got to get an education. I said, okay. And so he kind of kept pushing me in those directions and such. So I was just in that environment and never left it, and as much or more so as I am today.
Mm-hmm.
And so on. That was the fledgling general aviation world as we know today. Airports, crowd busters, charter, new styles of airplanes coming out. There was 4 airplanes in the world, and in over 15 years there's now 15 different types of airplanes.
Mm-hmm.
All the manufacturers began to mature, and they were flying piston-powered 2 and 4 engine airliners. And 1956 or 7 was when the Boeing 707 came out. And I can remember the day, the TV commercial when American Airlines advertised the 707. It showed a couple sitting in an area of the seat with a tabletop that comes back on the back of the seat, and they're sitting there and they had a quarter, and the guy put it down and he balanced the quarter. Big deal. Then it panned back, and he was at 30,000 feet in the Boeing 707. He could balance a quarter in the airplane. Now, prior to that, piston-powered airplanes, it's hard enough just to walk, let alone to do that. And so that was the age of aviation, and jets started coming in. And really into blossom at that point in time. I got my commercial pilot certificate when I was 18. Still not hardcore to be a pilot, but I was convinced I needed to go to school. And at my 18th birthday was on a Tuesday, as I recall. Doesn't make a difference, but I think it was a Tuesday. And in those days, all you had to do was have a commercial pilot certificate in your pocket and an airplane with what we call a 100-hour inspection. And you could get in that airplane and charge people money and fly all over the planet, do anything you wanted to do. So I got my commercial pilot certificate on Tuesday, and I should back up. My dad was one of the first FAA pilot examiners in the United States. And he was an FAA pilot examiner from the early 50s till the day he died. And so he gave me my flight test, which was terrible. I mean, my private certificate check ride was done over a 7-day period, 2 hours a day, when normally you do it in a half a day. And so he gave me my commercial pilot check ride. I finished it up on a Tuesday. The next day, in Ponca City, Oklahoma, north of there about 65, 70 miles is Wichita, Kansas. And there's a guy there named T.J. Cuzzolina drugstores, and he needed to go catch an airline out of Wichita. So I got my check ride on Tuesday morning, went out, put on shiny shoes, had a little suit, a tie, and I met T.J. Cuzzolina. How you doing, Mr. Cuzzolina? I'm 18 years old on Wednesday morning. Flew him up to Wichita, pulled up to the terminal, got him out, handed his bag, turned around, flew back to Ponca City. That's when it decided to break. Well, you keep bringing, excuse me, you keep bringing back a lot of the history.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I decided, yeah, I'm going to be a pilot. And kept going from there. I got a million stories, but another one that came out of that was I decided now I want to be a pilot, and I didn't want to go to college. Dad said, no, now that you want to be a pilot, I'll make sure you got all the, we'll get it all together, but you got to go to college. I says, no, I don't want to go to college, I want to be a pilot. And he sat down there, and he said, let me tell you a story. And I told the story. He told me, I want to be the best pilot in the world. And the story he gave me was back in the, if you ever watched old movies in the 20s, 30s, there were sewer lids on the street. You lift up a sewer lid, or you'd find a garbage can lid. And there'd be kids going down the street with a stick, rolling these up and down the street, New York and different parts of the country. That was a game they would play. And he said, well, you might be a pilot, be the best pilot there is. He said, but you need to have an education. And he said, if you go out and let's say you want to be a sewer lid roller, and you go out and you be the best damn sewer lid roller on earth. He said, you better than anybody. And you'd be really good. He said, but John, there's just not much demand for sewer lid rollers. So you got to go to college.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I just remember that. And there's other little incidences. That'll be in my book one of these days.
Yeah.
So
It's going to be a good book.
if I live long enough to write the damn thing. So.
I think you will. Let's jump ahead a little bit and talk about when you started working for Beech Aircraft in 1969.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of job were you doing for them?
I was a field sales engineer for parts and equipment marketing at Beech Aircraft Corporation. Again, due to the aviation business and such, my family had known the Beech family at one time or another, just a little bit. I didn't know them. A couple of good people that are about 4 or 5 years ahead of me in age that graduated from college was working for Beech Aircraft Corporation. One of them retired as a vice president only about 6 years ago. And I had grown up in an environment where we flew Cessna aircraft all the time. And I'd flown a lot of exotic tailwheel airplanes. But I had not flown Beech aircraft to amount to anything, just never flown it to speak of. So when I graduated in college in '69, it was time to move out of Oklahoma. It's time to go and to get a job, become a person, I guess. And I had flown, I went and interviewed at Cessna and I interviewed at Beech Aircraft. Both of them were located in Wichita. There was probably some subconscious thing throughout the family, don't go too far from home. But anyhow, I had offer from both Cessna and Beech Aircraft Corporation. And I had, at the time, I was 21, 22 years old, and I had about 3,000 hours of flight time. And 90% of it was in Cessna airplanes. So I took the Beech offer because I hadn't flown Beeches. Went to work for Beech. I had a lot of flight instruction experience and single engine, multi-engine airplanes, and went to work for Beech. And the only place they can could put me as in parts and equipment marketing and selling stuff. And I should back up a little bit. I didn't know where I wanted to fly commercial airlines. I didn't know about that. I already knew about general aviation, working at fixed-based operations in places like Chandler, and I really was involved with that, and I knew what I liked about that and thought about it. The airlines were another part, and another third area was working in the manufacturing end of aviation. So I already made a decision that I didn't want to go to work for the airlines. It was just too far removed from my character, what I want to do. I really liked fixed-based operations, which was on the other end of manufacturing and aviation operations. So I went to Beach because I hadn't flown Beach, and I wanted to see what that end of the business was like. It wasn't accidental. If I'd have wrote it down, you'd see the piece of paper today. I worked for Beach for about 9 or 10 months, maybe a year. I have to go back and look at it. And even then, in 69 and 70, had an awful lot of flight experience. And I was kind of an in-house flight instructor for single-engine airplanes. And I went through all the different classes and such. And my main job was I'd get an airplane on Monday morning and fly all over the north central United States, calling on Beechcraft aircraft distributors and parts departments, telling them how to set up inventory, how to do this and how to do that, and selling product kits and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I was instrument qualified, flying some pretty decent airplanes. So I traveled all over the north central United States. Over a period of a year, I ended up doing the East Coast and the North Central, and the whole experience was there. Beach went through strikes and all that kind of good stuff, but I ended up getting that end of the business and absolutely couldn't stand it. It was just terrible. I mean, you know, it was wearing a suit and a tie to work and doing that kind of stuff, and it just didn't work. But I did travel all over the country, flying Beechcraft airplanes. I did some in-house flight instruction with Beach, and it was just plain boring. It was not creative. I couldn't go out and do things on my own. So I got up one day and said, this is the end of that. And I was in Carbondale, Illinois, and I should say a few months before that, my then wife, we had taken a sports car and drove to the Grand Canyon and back from Kansas. And while I was there, all these helicopters were flying in and out of the Grand Canyon. And I said, that's something. Then I saw airplanes were flying in and out of the Grand, mostly airplanes in, very little helicopters.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, hey, that's kind of cool. I think I'd like to work out here and fly Grand Canyon tours. And get out of Oklahoma and go west, young man, go west. And drove back. I talked to a guy, and I got a fellow in Scottsdale, Arizona, that I talked to named Tug Walks. You guys have been, Chris has been trying to run Tug Walks down, but I talked to Scottsdale Aviation, talked to Tug Walks, and I came out and interviewed with one of the guys that was working for him and met Tug, and he's from Chandler and all that stuff. And decided to go to work for them. They offered me a job, so I was in Carbondale, Illinois, and I gave up the ghost. I called Diana, not Diana, I told my first wife, and I said, hey, let's go to Arizona. And a decision was made, and away we went. And
What was your wife's name?
my first wife's name was Joyce.
Joyce.
And I went to work at Scottsdale Airport working for Tug Walks. And I did Grand Canyon tours in the good old days. And I did charter work, and there was some strife going on inside that organization with one of their people. And to this day, I was smarter and better than him, but he was higher ranked than me, and so hell with that. I went out the door. Well, with all my traveling with Beech Aircraft Corporation, one of the fellows I met and became very good friends with was a salesman, parts, equipment, aircraft salesman in Illinois at Hartzog Schneck Aviation, and his name was Al Gradigan. And he and I palled around and did some things like that. He moved to Sky Harbor International, to Tempe, and went to work at Sky Harbor International, working for a company there called Anderson Aviation. And so, hey, moved out to Arizona, so here I am flying at Scottsdale, and he's at Arizona working at Sky Harbor. And the company that we worked for at Sky Harbor was owned by an aircraft insurance company. And, or rather, I was working at Scottsdale, he was working at Sky Harbor. Well, their chief flight, but that company was owned by an insurance company. Their chief flight instructor quit, and I should back up. Meanwhile, I got fed up with Scottsdale, and I was driving around that same little sports car in Colorado. I wanted to go to Colorado looking for a job, and I got a call from Al, and he was at Sky Harbor, and their chief flight instructor had quit. Mm. And they needed somebody to do that. And I said, okay, fine, I know how to do that. And I turned around and drove back to Sky Harbor and went to work for Anderson Aviation. And
what year was that?
I want to say it's February, March of '71. You know, if I'm off, it's not that far. And I went to work there. The fellow I interviewed with, who was a cigar smoking short guy that liked to sit around and watch the desk and go to clubs but didn't want to work that hard, in my opinion, he told me they needed a chief flight instructor. And I could have the job because they needed to keep the FAA certificate alive. And he said, now if you find another job, want to go somewhere else, you just do it. But this is not too important, but we need to keep it for the time being. If you want the job, you can have it. And I said to myself, God, if that's the way he thinks about it, I'll own this company in 5 years. I said that, went home and told my wife. I said, that's not the way you interview somebody and offer them a job. And I went to work for the company, and 5 years later I left. What I did was, my part of the company grew. I was at Sky Harbor International, and 5 years later it was going down. My part was doing well, the rest of the company was going down the tubes. And I formed my first corporation, and I want to say I was 20. I can't look, 29, give or take a year. I formed a corporation. I had no clue how to do that. So I picked up the books and started reading, and I formed a corporation. I got a bunch of people together that I'd met through aviation and wanted to do it. Went out, we raised some money and bought the assets of that company, and in 1975, it might have been 71, anyhow, late 75, I formed this corporation, and I bought that company from those people, just an asset sale. And actually it's 29 or 30, and that was a big mouthful. And over the next 4 years, we fought tooth and nail to stay alive, and it was pretty rough. And I sold out. We dissolved the partner, the stock was sold out. I mean, such. And meanwhile, Al, who was working for the company, he went to work for another company here in town selling aircraft. And in 1978, it was 3 years, is when we decided it was time to let somebody take this company over before we all went broke. And we actually already were technically not with bankrupt and such as that. Everybody has to go out of business once. You learn more from that than being in business for 20 years successful. And so we sold before we got in any trouble, and sold our stock for 10 cents on the dollar to a guy from Minnesota. who came down and took over the company and promptly went out of business 6 months later. He thought he had it all figured out. Meanwhile, I wanted to get out of the big city. Sky Harbor International, living in Tempe. Meanwhile, my first wife had gone on. It wasn't a divorce or anything. It was she had an injury, and she's in a custodial care place in Tulsa and has been for 35, 40 years now. And that's interesting. My first wife, God, you keep bringing back all this stuff. My first wife, Joyce, her maid of honor was a gal named Chris. 10 years later, after the episode had occurred with her brain injury, I get a phone call, and it was my current wife, Diana, who was best friends with Chris. And she had just moved to Arizona. Diana had, and Chris had come down to visit her, and they wanted to check on me and see what the status of my first wife was. And so she called and talked to me, and at the time I was single and been single for about a year. And I was doing everything a crazy single guy would try to get away with. And we went out for a date that night, and we've now been married 35 years. But anyhow, we were working together at Sky Harbor, and she was working for a local alarm company, and Show Low, Arizona was emerging as a mountain town. So I got up, I met a guy and went up there, and I went to Show Low in January of '79 and started a little company called Show Low Air Service. And actually, there was a company already there, Show Low Air Service. I went, it wasn't Show Low Air Service. I was working for a guy up there, and he turned out to be he was from Chandler, and he was a good guy, but he had some dubious background. He's still alive and lives downtown here. And so I, after about 6 weeks, decided I needed to go another direction. Mm-hmm. And I formed Show Low Air Service and started doing a flight training thing. And Diana and I would work. She'd work at the phone company, and I'd do flight training. And she worked for the Fort Apache Timber Company for a while, and we do flight training. And we lived in Show Low, and about 13, 14 months. And I decided, okay, I didn't like the big city, but I disliked the mountains in Show Low even less. And the guy that owned Chandler Air Service, just before I left the company at Sky Harbor, we'd sold him a Piper Tomahawk, a little two-place trainer. So December the 19th, I don't say it was the date, I called him from Show Low, and I said, I need to move back down the valley.
This is in '79?
This is December '79. And I said, I've looked around. I knew all the operations. I knew all over the places. I had the background, the training, the experience. I was a pilot examiner, all the little things that one needs to have. And I knew everybody. And I called 2 or 3 of them. I said, hey, I just want to move back to the valley. What do you got? Anything that you want me to do, I have to. And it was just, well, let's see. I called this guy out here, and I said, you got that airplane. Do you need a flight instructor? Do you need somebody to help with your company? You do anything? Because I just want to move down there. And he said, well, really? This is December 19th. He said, I'm thinking about selling the company. I said, well, okay. Let's come down and talk about it. Now, I'd already built the company at Sky Harbor, did that, did Show Low Air Service, did that. And so I went down and investigated all the stuff that went to. So December the 19th, I talked to him. The morning, December 20th, I come down and to visit him. Diana and I came down and went to Sideburns Cafe and had breakfast. They were just getting ready to tear the street up to put Arizona Avenue to 4 lanes at the time. And the whole downtown was tore up. And we went in there and I talked to him for a few hours. And went back up the mountain, called him 2 days later, and I wrote him up an offer, and I bought Chandler Air Service. That was his company. And it had again, even that was an issue. He told me he had a bunch of things he didn't have, and I said, I don't care. So I bought Chandler Air Service. I talked to a guy on the 19th, the 21st, I had bought it, and January 1st, 1980, walked in the door, and been here ever since. So every January 1st is an anniversary, and this next January 1st will be 31 years. And I chose Chandler because of all the airports in the valley. There's been no new airports in the valley since. There has actually been none go away. Now, Williams Air Force Base was out there at the time, and it was a different breed of cat. But it was the only airport left in the Phoenix metropolitan area that had the potential to be a really super fine airport. You could get in for a certain amount of cost, you could work with the community and grow with the community. So I deliberately had talked to all these other people, and I decided this guy in Chandler, I'm going to talk to him. And I categorically described it as the last frontier. It's the last airport that you could get into early enough in the game to work with the city and grow with the city. And that was the deliberate thing. First student I had on January 2nd was Danny Riggs. Riggs Road and had the farms all out to the south. And we started working here. Nothing you see was here, of course. And the whole process of how Chandler Air Service developed after that, and all the things that have happened since then. I started on that day, and a lot of nice people in town, 21,000 people, and other than Barbara and Norm Knox, the Sneffs, and a few others, most of them are gone. And,
Can you describe the airport, what you remember as far as like how it looked and what was actually here when you started in 1980?
I got pictures of it, but that's on the sites. But no, Chandler Airport was the several years before that at Sky Harbor. Chandler Airport was that airport way on the other town that we'd fly over and solo students in. Going from Sky Harbor to Chandler was a cross-country trip over all farmland. We used to do our takeoffs, our emergency procedures, and our flight maneuvers and everything over between Chandler and Phoenix. And Tempe stopped at Baseline Road. From Baseline to here was nothing but 100% farming. And Chandler was this little cluster of buildings. So we did all the flying in that area. So I knew where Chandler was. If the previous, from 72 to this time at 80 was when Scottsdale began to blossom. The city got behind it, the community got behind it, and they developed a tremendous airport. There was no place left in all the airports in the valley that could ever happen again, and that was Chandler. And it was just enough far away to do it. So, because I remember when I worked at Scottsdale, I drove through 7 miles of farmland to get to Scottsdale, because you don't do that anymore. So I saw this area down here, and I wanted to be at that airport. I could see it growing at it, and it was still the community and the people and such. So I came in and I sat back and just kind of started working at it. The airport itself, Alma School Road was the chip seal road. You would go to downtown Chandler, you'd go east on Chandler Boulevard till you hit McQueen, turn right, come down to Germain, turn left here, and it was absolutely nothing but a little two-way blacktop road. The entrance to the airport where my building is over there, you came down a dirt road over here to Cooper. Came down Cooper, came west on a dirt road, found here and came around where that building is over there, and made a left turn on a dirt road and went over to the, at the time it was the Old Rock Terminal. I don't know whether you've got any pictures of that.
I have not seen that.
That would be, if anybody could find that, right over there was the terminal building for Chandler.
And what did that look like?
It was like out of 1650. The year 1650.
It's like
it was-
adobe or something?
No, it was rock. It looked like somebody had taken all these huge rock. It was a big rectangular building, one story, just rocks and rocks. Like some farmer had built it there 100 years ago, but it was a rock terminal. All rocks all the way around it. And inside it was a couple of partitions and 3 or 4 little rooms and a bathroom at one end. And on the east end of this big rock terminal building was a fireplace 20 feet long, 6 feet high, with a hearth that you could cook the cow in the dumb thing. And that was the city terminal. And we've got to find pictures of that, because the rock terminal was there for decades and decades and decades. And just on this side of the terminal, and again, it was a dirt road all the way to there. Venture Aviation, that's over here, they operated out of one corner of that building. And right on the north side of it, about 200 yards, 50 yards over there, was the police firing range. They had a big dirt thing up there, and the police were out there all the time, shooting and practicing their guns and such as that. But the rock terminal, I don't think I've got anything of that, but it was absolutely fantastic. And the walls were like 2 feet thick, a foot thick of rock. You know, like you see a rock fireplace put together with a roof on it and such. And it had to be 15, 20, it had to be 1,400 square foot building and such.
Sounds like the Flintstones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but if you were to, and I could see it just like looking at it. Well, the airport continued to grow. The things that went along with it is there. It's gone now, but the city decided when they built this ramp area here, the city wanted to move over to a little house. They went, bless their heart, they moved onto the airport a double wide trailer, 20 by 50. Put it together and put it out there and set it up, and that was a new terminal building. Always made us mad because they didn't get any permits, it didn't need any codes, it didn't anything. The city of Chandler, they could make their own terminal out of that dumb building. Well, right after that building was opened up, they bulldozed that house, the old terminal building, and built the ramp out there. And that was just terrible. Right next to it was the old fuel farm where they used to pump gas out of, which was dug out of the ground, went over and put where it presently is right now. And so the airport was drive down Germain, go down Cooper, come in a dirt road. If it rained, it was a dirt road. And you came around our building, went over to the old rock terminal. And this north runway was I think it was either 33 or 3,600 feet long. It's 4,400 feet now. And where my building is right there was a little gravel place that walked, taxied out, and there was a concrete pad out there. And the northeast end of the runway was out there, instead over there. And we do the run up and take off there and come back, land and come back here. It was systematically expanded. And again, city planning, they wanted to do something. So they would build an extension on the runway, which made it better and easier to work. But they didn't have a taxiway to get to the end. So they built an extension and put a little Mickey Mouse taxiway over there. And they ended up with a straight runway with a taxiway that made a couple of curves to get there. Then they come on with a federal grant project in early 90s. They straightened out that taxiway. It was late 80s. And now we had a pretty decent runway. And it ended up going to, in 3 stages, from, I want to say 33 to 36 to 4,000 to 4,400 feet. That's the length of it now, it's 4,400 feet. And new taxiways were put in and such. Well, after that, and during the process of that, the last taxiway needed to be straightened out. There needed to be a lot of finish on the north runway. It was in 93, 89 and 90 when it came up to build a south runway, a parallel runway.
Mm-hmm.
It's much safer, more economical, and easy to have 2 runways side by side than to have one 2 miles long. And so a parallel south runway was put in there. The traffic was picking up, the airport was busier. All of the things that would be good for the airport was coming about. Then the city council, the city staff, everybody in the 80s was all behind the airport and the development of the airport. And things were happening and such. The south runway was built in the early 90s, and we as operators told the city, do not build two runways without a control tower. You're going to have a circus. One runway you can get away with it. If you got two runways parallel, you're going to have a real zoo. And so all the efforts were already being put in to get an FAA or a contract control tower at the airport. That's normal growth and such was going. And so they actually finished the south runway, and the north runway was there, but due to the safety issue, they closed the north runway for a year while they resurfaced and cleaned up the taxiways on the north runway. And in the meantime, now the north runway's ready to open, south runway's going, and then they come out and get an FAA tower, and we had a little FAA tower set on the south side. So when both runways finally opened at the same time, we had a tower.
And when was that tower built? That was the little short.
Yeah, and there's plenty of pictures of that around. I'm going to say 95-ish, 96, 95. The natural next progression was like the north runway went from a small, dinky, not very good place to go to a practical runway. The south runway was built wider, longer to accommodate continued growth of the airport. When the south runway was constructed, there was actually 1,800 feet on the northeast end and 1,000 feet on the southwest end that is out there today as we speak, was graded and leveled, and drainage was set for the lengthening of the runway somewhere down the road.
Mm-hmm.
It was all paid for by the government, and it was all put together, and the plans, the contractors that built that runway, by the way, was Aiken Gardner. They're here in town now. They constructed the runway, and the plans showed the site prep for the continued growth of the south runway, same as the north runway did. North runway was done. And then we started running into issues with politics and neighbors at the airport, and then the south runway has never been finished, and the south runway, south side, has never been developed. The number of businesses on the airport, there's been, since I've been here, 1980, there's been 10 flight schools come and go since I've been here. Neil's the outgrowth of the first helicopter flight school that came and went. Neil took over from that. There has been no new fixed-based operations, formal operations to develop and do things at the airport since 1999, 2000. And from that point till now, well, until 3 years ago, the airport had progressed to, at one point, it was the 41st or 42nd busiest airport in the entire United States, and it was the 12th or 13th busiest general aviation airport. And we were just busting at the seams to do things, and it was starting to get pretty crazy. It was starting to get kind of hard to manipulate. The south runway was keeping people from coming here, and those that did come here had to work harder to get in and out of the airport, and the community with the businesses and everything needed a better airport. And since that didn't come about in the early 2000s, the airport has stagnated since 2000. There has been no new businesses. There's been no further desire to do things on the airport because it has such a restriction on the infrastructure operating the airport. Well, meanwhile, 2 years ago, the economy went down, and the traffic count on the airport is down 30-some-odd% right now. Fuel sales, which is a mainstay for any airport and airport operation, is down 30 to 40%. Neil's operation is down a certain amount because he specializes in helicopters. My operation today, as we speak, is as busy as it's been in 2 years. And our maintenance is okay, but we don't try to conquer the whole world. We're a community-based airport. We don't advertise anywhere. The only thing we have is a website, And we do, our yellow page ad used to be this big, now they're that big. And we have survived this whole turndown, everything that's going on. And in the process of surviving that, I've learned a little bit more how to do our business and such. But as it speaks today, there will be no further investment by my operation. There will be no other attempts to meet the community's requirements other than what we have, unless the city does make some efforts to get behind their airport promoted. And so where I'm coming from, Neil's coming from, you look at the history of the airport, neither one of us got here by accident. The city didn't get here by accident. It got because it's a good community, a growing community, and the politics got involved in 1999 and 2000, and it's nailed on the airport. And we're going to get past that sometime soon, hopefully.
Okay. Let's go back a little bit. I want to talk more about Chandler Air Service itself,
Okay.
as far as the operations and change over time with your business. And I have a few questions in relation to that. When you started, when you took it over and kind of started your version of Chandler Air Service in 1980, like what exactly were the types of operations that you were doing here? Like how many aircraft did you have, that kind of thing? Kind of what was your start?
When I talked to the guy that I was buying from, his name was Jim, another story, he ended up, another stuff with that. But when I came in on that December 21st and to do the thing, he told me he had 6 airplanes for rental or lease. He owned one, and the rest of them were rented and leased. It was that metal building over there, nothing. Just a building, a little chip seal thing went out. And the block lean-to portion of it on the west side was just a block wall. No windows, no floors, there was no windows, no doors. There was tumbleweeds in it, and it was full of dirt. And we were operating in that hangar over in the corner in a storage room with a commode and a water sink there, a little wall, and a little 6x8 area. That was the whole business. We went in there, and again, the concept you have to understand, I wanted to be at the very bottom list of what was available at this airport, which was the only thing. And with that, I had nowhere to go but up. So there were 6 airplanes, and he had this number of renter pilots. He had these many students. He had all these things going on, and there was leases on the ground which were very short. And I didn't really care how long the leases were. All I wanted was a place to sit down, because I knew if I'm in the building, I'm going to take care of the rest of the future. So I moved out. I came in on January the 1st. I supposedly had 6 airplanes, the other little amenities and such in there. Among other things, he had a little upholstery shop in the corner of that hangar, which he cleaned all that out. So January 1st, that morning, New Year's Day, I came in, met him, and I had sold an airplane 3 weeks before that, and I made that amount of money on the airplane. I gave him that amount of money for Chandler Air Service. That's all I paid for it. And I had to carry back on the building I paid off for a period of time. So I came in that morning, and Diane and I came out, we're right there, we sit there, and literally just like you open a house, you just rent it up. We sit in there, and I looked around and I said, "Where are all the airplanes?" He looked at me and he said, "Well, they're all gone except the Tomahawk." And I said, "Wait a minute, there was 5 airplanes here 2 weeks ago. Now there's only this one airplane?" And there's 5 of these. Yeah, there's 5, and I might have said 6 of it, but there's 5 and there's one airplane. He said, "Well, they're all gone." I said, "Well, wait a minute, you told me you had all these airplanes and this was flying and raining." He says, "Well, I did." I said, "So what happened to them?" He says, "They all canceled their leases." And I said, Diane and I both almost broke down right then, because we weren't going to keep hardly any of them anyhow. It was a bad deal. But I bought the building, the Tomahawk, and the business had all these other 4 airplanes that I could work out of to improve. Well, they were gone. And that whole day was just a terrible day as to what are we going to do now. And here we are in town, and self-employed, no income, nothing, and to start our business. And come to find out, 2 weeks later, as I got to talking to these people, every one of them had already terminated their lease the first part of December. When I bought the company from him, he knew they were going away at the end of December. So I get up that morning with this dirt road coming around here to the rock hangar and the building with half of it's full of tumbleweeds and dirt, and a hangar sitting out there, and one airplane. And first, and we didn't have a place to live either. A friend of mine in Mesa, we lived at their house for the next 4 months. Drove back and forth from Mesa. And we just said, okay, we let her rip. We worked 90 days straight, finishing out the building, doing the carpet. I traded flight training for the carpet, flight training for the windows. I got it painted, I got phones moved around, and in 90 days, we had an office and area going there. The Tomahawk, we started flying it. I did all the things on the same thing we do today. Exactly the same thing we do today with one airplane and 2 of us. And over the next 6 or 7 months, we now had a building. We had a hangar. It was clean. We had offices. In a short period of time, I had 3 airplanes, and 2 of them were airplanes in Sholo that I'd leased that the guy said, I want to take them down to Scott to Chandler and leave them with you there. So I ended up with 3 airplanes, and Diana and I, and we worked 7 days a week. There wasn't anybody working for us. And for 90 days, then we got through to the point we were starting to do flying. There was a tremendous amount of need for the flying here. The previous year, when I was up at Sholo, I personally had flown 1,200 hours of flight time. Now, if I can put that in perspective, the average pilot that owns an airplane flying around flies 30 to 50 hours a year. And I flew 1,200 hours in the previous year. So I got down here and I was just getting airplanes and going flying. Started doing the things that, all the stuff I did at Sky Harbor a year or so before that, before I left Sky Harbor, I implemented down here. Mm-hmm. And so inside of 6, 7 months, I hired an instructor, and we've been just the same thing ever since. We teach people how to fly and rent them airplanes. At one time, and I bought the fuel from the city of Chandler, and I bought the insurance from this guy, and I had Button Aviation doing the maintenance on my airplanes. And so all I did was rent airplanes, teach people how to fly, bought the maintenance there, bought the fuel there, bought the insurance there. And over the next decades, and I wished I'd have wrote it down then, but I wanted to do this, and this, and as it gets today, we own our own airplanes, we own our own buildings, we own our own maintenance facility, we own our own fuel facility, and we're affiliated and own our own aviation insurance business. So all the things it takes to support the company that we paid for then is now internal in the company. Mm-hmm. And by being here 30 plus years and not doing too many stupid things, we are able to survive the economy the way it's happening. Mm-hmm. We have, are looking at a good year, but not the same kind we had 3 years ago. Yeah. And so if you say, what did you do when you came here 31 years ago? Exact same thing. Had one airplane, me and Diana, in this airport.
How many employees do you have now?
Too damn many. 27, I think.
27.
Full and part-time.
Yeah. And when did you move? Like, what was the change over time? You started in the big metal building, the big metal hangar. When did you get over into this facility?
The building over there was just the hangar and that block lean-to on the west side. Around 84, I built the 2-story addition on the side and added 2,000 square feet more into it. In the meantime, I owned the total lease at Chandler Air Service was one piece of ground, 180 by 55 feet wide. It was little tiny thing, which you couldn't do anything in. Well, adjacent to it was, was more of these parcels that had been drawn up. And I called Chandler and I says, hey, I want to lease some more of the ground. And I want to say Al Crawford, I think was his name, but Al was the public works manager in 1981. He said, hey, you want to lease some ground? Just write me a letter. So I wrote him a letter and I leased a piece of ground for $50 a month. And I said, hey, it's all right. So I wrote him a letter. I ended up quadrupling the size of the property over there inside of a year. Chandler was tickled, man, I have property, I'm doing this stuff. And then that piece of property is the east half of the ground between that Chandler Aviation hangar and my building. I then got up one day and took that whole approximately 1.5, 2 acres and flopped it over and made an offer to lease all the property on the other side. So I ended up with that lease over there, which is right about 2 acres. And in the process of doing it, I added that 2,000 square foot addition onto the building. And we were starting to cook, go along. And again, it was just me, it was just her, and a few employees. And working with Button, who helped with the maintenance, and still buying fuel from the city. In 1986, 87, everything where we are now was a paint shop and a crop dusting outfit. And so they were going away over there, the crop dusting was going away, and that had kind of pretty much wound down.
Is that Bob Copeland?
Yeah. And was winding down. So it was still there, but this whole ground that we were sitting on here, this 2 acres, was just raw dirt and such. And so I got industrious and made an offer to lease this piece of ground and put a building on it, a hangar. And I went through all of this stuff you do exactly today. Go through permitting and all that stuff. But one of the unique things about it is the airport at the time was zoned as rural residential and agricultural. So in order to put a hangar on the city of Chandler's airport for airplanes, I had to go through a 4-month process of getting a variance to put a hangar on the airport because they had it set up for something else. And the building was, it took me 3 years before I could break ground on the building. It took us a 1.5 years to finish it, and in 1988 we moved into this building as you see today.
Mm-hmm.
The concept, because it's so hard to get leases on airports, it's so hard to develop business at the airport, my concept was to get this chunk of ground on both sides to be available for people to come to the airport. It was academic. Little cafe went into business in 1988 when we opened it up. The Hangar Cafe, man, they probably thought they had died and gone to heaven. The building looks like a hotel. People say, has it got hotel rooms? No, it's offices and spaces for people to rent. And so that just come to fruition. I've got pilot supplies, I've got hangar, I've got a flight school, got a maintenance facility, got a cafe, offices to rent and such as that, and all the amenities that wanted to come up with on this end. So it was a deliberate attempt to get this little this place built out here. And that was done in 88. It grew, matured, got better, the runway got longer, things were going, we were expanding. We went from 8 airplanes to 20 airplanes. We went from 6 employees to 20-something employees. And then the property to the north of the airport, of our building here across Ryan Road,
Mm-hmm.
We had put together, us and a couple other people, to put together a very large corporate aircraft facility, maintenance facility, and an international parts distributing facility for aircraft. It was put together, the estimate was $2.5 million to build it. It was already drawn up, the pictures were on the wall, and the 1999-2000 bond issue come out, and the politics came along, and they voted not to give money to the airport. to extend the runway.
Mhm.
And that was on Tuesday. On Wednesday morning, we took it all down and we dumped the $2.5 million project. No money was spent, it just stopped right there, and there's been no further investment in 10 years. That's how important it was for the airport to get behind it. So we have done nothing since then. Same size property, we've done cleaning up, maintaining it, doing things like that. I'm prepared to lease more property. There are people prepared to come to the airport and to do more things for the future. And I'm sorry I got away from your question, but the day we came in here, there was one airplane of me and Diana, and we were on a septic tank, 1980. It's 2010, and we're still on septic tanks. There are roughly 75 employees and 5 acres of ground, not 75 anymore, about 50. And that building, this one building, and Venture across the road are still on septic tank. And you think somebody would wise up and try to make this place a modern joint one of these days. So.
Okay, I have some kind of specific questions about some of the things that you've done with Chandler Air Service. One of the things I'm interested in is I found out that you've been involved with the high school flying program, South Mountain High. Can you talk a little bit about how that got started?
In the mid-90s, the Phoenix Union High School District got involved with desegregation, I guess it is. The schools, they needed to spread the mixes of the talent going to the schools. And so the federal government came up with a magnet program, which draws students from different school districts to a school to get it desegregated, I guess. And Phoenix Union High School District came up with the idea using South Mountain High School, which was in pretty bad shape, and a flight training program. And that flight training program was put together, and that in itself is an act of Congress of God altogether, what done back then. But that program was put together at that time, and among other things, Phoenix Union High School, the kids were trained for ground school, trained for things, and they have different programs, not just flying, but they were put in there. That started, I want to pick the number and say it was 1995, but and it got put together. There was bidders on the project. There was a school at Sky Harbor, there was a school at us, and you had to be an FAA-approved flight school to do it. And we got out of 15 students, we got about 5 or 6. And part of the things that makes it tough for anybody else is we had to bus them over here. They couldn't drive over here. So we get a car and we drive to South Mountain High School, pick up the kids, bring them out here. They'd fly an hour and a half. We'd take them back in and come back. And we started that in '95. Over the next 3 or 4 years, the other schools went out of business. The classes grew to where there's anywhere from 13 to 16 students, all seniors each year. The magnet program, all the requirements were met by South Mountain Community College somewhere in the late 90s or 2000, but I'm going to say the late 90s. But it was such a successful program, and they liked it from their perspective so much. The Phoenix Union High School District took it over as a district project, and now it's funded not by the federal government, but the Phoenix Union High School District. And due to the metamorphosis of flight schools and the ability of schools to do it and change in the flight training business, we're the only one that's really qualified on this end to do it. And so every September, after school starts, we start bringing the kids back and forth, and we fly with them through, usually from September through middle of May and when school's out. It's a contract, it's bid. At certain times you can renew based on this, but it's a contract, it's bid, and they pay us for the students. We pick them up, deliver them from the college or from South Mountain High School. And today, as we speak, we're 15 years into it.
How many students do you have this year?
This year is the first year it's down because of the economy and all that stuff. They cut back on their funding. Last year, I think we had 15. This year, we have 8.
Is it mostly boys? Do you have any girls?
I don't think we've got any girls this year, but usually it's about a third girls and two-thirds guys.
Interesting.
And you pick your group. The African Americans, the Spanish kids, the Oriental, white folk, it's a nice cross section. All these people come out and do it.
Mm-hmm.
We have trained kids at senior year in high school that have come out of here and today are flying for airlines. The other 98% aren't, but a couple of three of them are. And some of them are going to be mechanics, going to do other things. So a certain percentage of them went on to stay in aviation. A lot of them had absolutely no money to do this, and it was all funded by the school. And when the school got out and they got their license, it was not used. But we've had a bunch of those that 2, 3, 4, 5 years later, they're out of college, they got a job, and they come back in with us, and they want to get current, we call it, and rent airplanes, just get back into it. So we've got a pretty broad base of people out there from South Mountain.
Tell me a little bit about the aerobatic program.
Well, aerobatics is an art form when it comes to airplanes and flying. It's nothing dangerous, it's not irresponsible, it's just doing what an airplane can be designed to do. The 1965, I did my first attempt at rolling an airplane. Scared the hell out of myself. And that was before there was training, before there was this kind of stuff. And I did 3 of them in a row based on what a guy told me. And the third one wasn't as scary as the first one, and that was the end of it. Didn't do anymore. When I went to work for Beech Aircraft Corporation in '69, after getting out of college, they had a Beechcraft Aerobatic Bonanza and a Beechcraft Aerobatic Musketeer. And because I had all this experience in little airplanes, I went up with the Beech factory demonstrator pilot, and he taught me basic aerobatics in the Musketeer and Bonanza. And I really got into it, and I became the in-house guy. I'd fly around the West in one of these airplanes, or the Northeast and such, and I'd come on the dealers, I'd go up and take the people for a ride, do aerobatics and airplanes, just lazy stuff. And over the years when I was working at Sky Harbor, there was a little bit of aerobatics and Beechcraft Bonanzas that were certified for it, and I'd do a roll here and there once in a while. When I bought Chandler Air Service, the day I moved in there, and I told you there was one airplane, well, in the hangar was an airline pilot owned a Great Lakes Special, just like the same things we got here, a 2-place open cockpit biplane, and I hadn't even seen it there, and it was stuck in the hangar. So he said, well, let's go for a ride with it. Then I went out and rode with him in a true hardcore aerobatic biplane, and that was it. That was cool. Coolest thing I could do. Now, I'll preface that a little bit. Most aerobatic airplanes have a tail wheel instead of a nose wheel. The average airplane, 99% of them got a nose wheel, so they steer from the front. They fly on the ground, take off and landing quite a bit different. The tail wheel airplanes are more the hot rod, more the off-road type airplanes, more rugged landings, and that's all they were in the early 40s and 50s. So training in tail wheel airplanes was, again, something that was not done. And I grew up in tail wheel airplanes. I had thousands of hours of tail wheel airplanes when I bought this company. And so I had a desire that lost art form needed to be brought back into vogue. I wanted to get into doing some tail wheel. Also, I wanted to do some aerobatics. So I actually ended up leasing a Great Lakes, an aerobatic Great Lakes 6075 Lima in December of 1980. And that airplane's still sitting in a hangar right now. It's the highest flight time Great Lakes in the world. And I've owned it for 30 years. And I got into basic aerobatics, and at the same time started doing tail wheel training. But it's using the same airplane for tail wheel and aerobatics, and that wasn't the best way to do it. After a period of time, I bought my first tail wheel just for trainer Piper Cub type airplane. And over the years, we now do tail wheel training for people from all over the country to do that. We do aerobatic training, special programs for it. We have a couple of government agencies that do what we call unusual attitude and emergency recovery training. They fly our bigger, more sophisticated airplane. They get what we call good stick and rudder training and this kind of thing. People from Alaska fly tailwheel airplanes, and they're always getting into trouble up there, and we have special programs using aerobatics and such to improve their skills to take care of that. We also, in the mid-'80s, got into aerobatic competition with the International Aerobatic Club. Myself, Kurt, Steve, and such, we went to 4 competitions a year in the Southwest, and we perform at aerobatic competitions. It's different levels of sophistication, different levels of airplanes. And so we started doing aerobatic competition. The fact that we were a full-time, 7-day-a-week school with full-time professional flight instructors, we became well-known throughout the United States as the best place to go get aerobatic training, and the weather was always good. So with that, the aerobatics through 80 through 82 through 88 really matured, well-known. The Phoenix Aerobatic Club was the biggest, the best, and the most. You had the most in the bank from all the projects they had. And so we're very well known in aerobatics. I got little odds and ends and things around from aerobatics and all the different competitions. And today, the way things are, the aerobatic community is somewhat dwindled and kind of like the flying farmers, if you want to look at it that way. And we specialize in taking the average pilot and making them a better pilot. There is aerobatics, and tailwheel does that. Aerobatics is to the typical pilot, it's like walking on the moon. They're not going to be able to get around to it. But you can come to Chandler, Arizona, walk in here, get the good airplanes, good instructors, well-run organization, and get all kinds of aerobatic training. And you go away a much better pilot. We have, I would say if you look at, we have people coming from all over the world, all over the United States, to Chandler for tailwheel and aerobatic training. And we have a website, and that's where they usually come from. And word of mouth is the other thing that does it. So aerobatics, we use good airplanes. We have 4 of them. Actually, we have 5. We got basic level, and we got hardcore advanced level aerobatics. The pilots are not young people; they're experienced, high-time pilots. Mm-hmm. And we've done it so long we're somewhat arrogant about it. If you come in here and try to tell me how you want to learn to fly and how you want to get aerobatics, we give you a choice: do it our way or the highway. And we're 1,000% so far. People find out we know more about it than they do. So the aerobatics it's great. It's good for the community. It's anybody that's a pilot knows this is the place to do that, and it's the greatest place in the world to do this kind of stuff. If I were to add up tailwheel and aerobatic, if I go from an economic standpoint, we did it here a while back. We looked at the people that come in and do aerobatics, the people that come in and do tailwheel training. Mm-hmm. If they stay say they come in and stay for 5 days to do it, then that's 5 hotel rooms. 1,500 hotel rooms a year in Chandler because of tailwheel and aerobatics. 1,500 hotel rooms. Neil's got as much as that with helicopter stuff. And right now I've got 3 people that are from overseas that are in here doing time building on aircraft, and they're here for 4 weeks, 3 a night. There are 3 different nights, so let's take that up to 120 hotel rooms. Mm-hmm. And they rent cars, hang out at the restaurants and such.
So what is the difference between tailwheel and aerobatic training?
Well, most aerobatic airplanes are tailwheel airplanes.
Okay.
So in order to do good aerobatics, you need to have a good tailwheel background so that you can both take takeoffs, landings, and do the flying part of it.
So can you give me a little more description, because I'm not familiar with that term, what that means exactly?
What, tailwheel?
Mm-hmm.
Most airplanes have a landing gear here, and a nose, and it steers through the front, just like your car steers. A tailwheel airplane, the landing gear sits further front, and the tailwheel's on its back, and it steers from the back. Okay. As a result, there's less weight, there's less drag and such in that. That okay?
Yes.
And the skill level that it takes to fly that airplane is, for takeoff flying, is quite a bit more. It is, as tailwheel pilot described people that fly airplanes with the nose gears, they're flying an airplane with training wheels. And a good analogy, almost perfect analogy, is if you get in your car and you drove out here to the airport or you go back home, you steered it from the front and you don't have any problem doing it. Take the same car and get in it and drive home in reverse at the same speeds and the same effort that you did getting out here. You'd probably get about 100 feet before you take out the fence. Steering from the back end is a different ballgame. But also the center of gravity changes of the airplane make them more sensitive to doing what we call a ground loop, getting off the side of the runway. And so it's I wouldn't call it more sophisticated, it's just a more difficult way of taking off and landing an airplane. And once you learn how to do it, then you get an airplane with a nose wheel, it's absolutely effortless to fly the airplane. If you go back a little further, to World War II and earlier, almost all the airplanes were tailwheel airplanes. You see all the World War machine, fighters and all that stuff, even the airliners are all tailwheel. And airports that were built back in those days had to have lots of intersecting runways because tailwheel airplanes are harder to handle when the wind is blowing crosswind to the runway. In the 1950s, they started building single runways in the prevailing wind and started building almost virtually everything with a nose wheel because it's very easy to land and take off in crosswind. So the metamorphosis went from tail wheel and lots of runways to nose wheel, only one. That's all you needed. And the art of flying tailwheel airplanes went away. In 1980 and 85 and 80 and 85, when we were training in tailwheel airplanes, and there was probably both hands, there were people in the country that did that kind of stuff. We ended up with, the system ended up with a lot of people wrecking airplanes. Go get their friend Fred, and they get out and do a takeoff and land tailwheel. Hey, you got it all right. Then you go out in the airplane and tear it up. It was so bad that in April of 1991, August of 1991, the FAA came out with a new regulation that said you can't fly a tailwheel airplane unless you receive specific training in it and endorsement from an instructor to do it. And that law came into effect in 91. And we've been doing it for 12 years or 10 years already. And so it lended a lot more credibility to the idea of doing that kind of takeoffs and landings and the flying. In flight, they fly pretty much the same. They're more fun, I think, than a regular airplane. But so the tail wheel training is now today, due to the law being passed, and there are not that many tailwheel airplanes out there. The training for it is very specialized, and most of the hot rod airplanes, the high performance aerobatic airplanes, air race airplanes, are all tailwheel. Due to the changes in the center of gravity of the airplane, the changes in the weight and the aerodynamics of them, they can go faster. Also, if you want to land in the boondocks, land on a river bottom, or land somewhere up in Alaska, tailwheel airplanes are much easier to do that. You don't have to worry about breaking the nose wheel off and tearing the thing up. So it has become, in the last 10 years, a lot more people are buying special tailwheel aircraft. And some pretty expensive airplanes out there. And we train people how to fly those airplanes. And they come from all over to do it.
So, speaking of people that you've trained, in terms of, learning how to fly, basically, when we were interviewing Neil, he talked about some people who have gone through quantum that are kind of known in the community, that kind of went on to make a name for themselves and kind of well known. Is there anybody that's trained with your company, Chandler Air Service, that you know, kind of has a big name now, or
Well,
you can kind of talk about that?
We've trained so many, and there've been a lot come and go. We've got a local aerobatic pilot here who's has his own airplane at the airport, and he goes around the country doing air shows. He was already a licensed pilot. We introduced him to aerobatic flight training and taught him basic aerobatics. He matured on from that.
Mm-hmm. What's his name?
John Melby. And we're mostly involved in aerobatic competition. So we've trained a lot of people that went on to the competition up through the unlimited level, and then have since gone through it and got out of it. And when you look at world famous people and such, the average person wouldn't have any clue who these people are. Helicopter guys like Neil has, you know, they go up and there's very little area to deal with, and most of his people are doing news reporting and such as that. Our guys learn how to fly, go buy them an airplane, do themselves some aerobatics, become quite good at it, and go on and actually they run the whole gauntlet, and some of them are still doing it right now and such. We taught Chip Beck, who down him was Dad, Bud Beck Pontiac. I got him, and he was a partner with me in the airplane in the early 80s. And he learned all his aerobatic stuff here, and he ended up buying airplanes and using one of our airplanes. He became an unlimited champion, and then now he's older, the business is sold, and he doesn't do that stuff anymore. Mm-hmm. We've trained an awful lot of aerobatic competition pilots. And the air show pilots, we've trained a couple of guys that went out and did some more air shows like Melby and such. But again, those groups are usually short-lived. Not mean literally lived. There's just so many years they're going to do that, and it's hard work and such. So I couldn't give you a name drop on anybody
Sure.
particularly famous that's done anything. It's just that we've trained a lot, and it's a very small group to begin with in the first place.
What's the kind of the main business for you as far as flight training? It's just kind of individuals coming in wanting to learn to fly.
Flight training, teaching people how to fly, private, commercial instrument multi-engine and ratings, the regular pilot certificates and ratings is our main business. Mm-hmm. You take that main business, flight training, and throw in there and include in it the tail wheel and aerobatic training, the tail wheel transitions and such. That's about 25% of it's the specialty stuff, and the rest of it's the flight training.
Okay, gotcha.
And that's where the biggest percentage of it comes from.
Okay, I'll wait for a second. I wanted to ask you about your wife, because you started, Diana was with you when you kind of started here, and it was sort of the two of you running the business at first. So what's been her role in your business?
Well, Diana was what I always referred to. She was the super secretary, the girl Friday, the assistant to the president of every corporation. Typed 1,000,000 miles an hour, took shorthand, good business head on her thing, very organized, very efficient. And she always worked for pretty sophisticated people, and she ran the show and did quite well at it. When I met her, she was working for an alarm company in Phoenix. My background, my degree is in finance and accounting. And so I'm into bookkeeping and things like that, and into the management and such. And I've always wanted to work with my wife. So when we were at Sky Harbor before going to Sholo, we needed a little help here and there. And I said, will you come out and learn what we're doing, see what it's like? And she came out and she enjoyed that. It's challenging, and she's a workaholic, and she just going 1,000 miles an hour all the time. And so we kind of got into that groove with her coming out after work and helping me with the company when we started Anderson, Arizona Piper at Sky Harbor. And then when we moved up to Sholo, there was a deliberate decision, let's see if we can work together on this. And there's some trials and tribulations from that. But I would get in the airplane, go fly the airplane, do all the stuff there, coordinate the maintenance, get the training done. They'd come in and give her the money, and she'd give them the receipt and put it in the bank. And so it has progressed from that, and it hasn't really changed a whole lot. She is office manager, corporate secretary, head honcho in the company, and we own the company together, make all the decisions together, not always together, but that's another story. And she has a couple of gals she works with. She meets and greets people coming in the door. She knows more about students, renters, and all the stuff that goes on in the company than anybody else over there. And we've got this level of things that I do and things that she do. And if I leave today, I have to have a minimum of 2 people to replace me. And I'm training those 2 as we speak. Diana, if she were to leave today, I have to have 2 people to replace her. And there's so much work to do, everything, payroll, accounting, but and I don't want to say bookkeeping, but it is that. We have a very, very sophisticated aviation accounting system, very sophisticated. And all the buildings are hooked up, and she can do all of the accounting functions a CPA would do, as I can do. And bill paying, management of money. You take a look at corporations who've got comptrollers, their whole job is to bring in the money, spend it, DV it, put it in this account, do that stuff. She does all of that stuff. And when I'm not here, she's God, and when I'm here, she's still God. We never had any children. That was the deliberate decision. We're going to be in the airplane business, or you're going to have children. So, and I mean, everybody knows that. We just made that decision.
And you got married in the late 70s? You got married in the late 70s?
75.
75? Okay.
And
I want to ask you, because we're about 6:15 now, so I want to ask you just a couple more questions.
yeah, Diana's about to faint from hunger over there.
Yeah, I bet. If you can answer this question and just sort of think about it generally, because I know this can get into a lot of detail, because I've heard the conversations that we've had when we've had some of the committee meetings about this. So I know this could be like a whole nother hour probably, but overall, just thinking about how things have changed over time, starting like in 1980 basically till today, how would you describe the relationship of the airport with the surrounding community over time, since you've been here in 1980?
The surrounding community didn't know the airport existed until 1989. And then a gentleman with County Island got the community, Sun Lakes and way over there, 3 or 4 miles from the airport, all riled out that if we put a second runway to the south, that we were going to have Boeing 747s coming into this airport. TV ads and everything. And the community became aware of the airport at that time. Now, so the community became aware of it. Then through the 90s and in the mid-90s, the airport continued to grow and things came like that. And I have pictures of the county pictures of the airport, aerial pictures, and you can go 88, 89, 90, 95, and you can it's just like a growth of buildings and homes up to the airport. And the community was not a big issue, it was a normal issue. And through the end of 1990. And then the environment was people placed the community began to weigh on the city of Chandler more than their airport. The support of the airport, the future of the airport began to become replaced by, let's get more people here, let's build more houses and such as that. rules were broken left and right. Homes were built up close to the airport. And when you build a home a half a mile from the airport, then in 1999, 2000, 2001, the community was very aware they've got an airport. And they blamed it on everybody but themselves. So the community has become, as a whole, we did a little straw inventory, talking to people here a while back. One of our guys went around and he was asked about the airport. 80% of the people he talked to didn't even know there was an airport. This is last year. Of those that knew there was an airport there, they didn't know we had a airport commission that worked it, that did something at the airport. So the majority of the community is, my personal opinion, the airport's an airport. No, it's there. So the community, as a whole, properly educated, made aware, would find the airport is good for them, and that's what we're always fighting. That those that aren't, as a whole, 99% of all the complaints and all of the issues that the community brings about the airport are people that live within 3/4 of a mile of the airport that moved here 40 years after the airport was developed. So these people are the squeaking wheel, and our elected officials tend to look at the squeaking wheels. And we have made a lot of inroads in the last 2 or 3 years. You get people to be aware that the airport is not what you think it is. It's a nice little airport, it's a busy airport, and it just aggravates me to no end when people say airport, they just throw their hands up in the air, oh, this is bad, this is bad. Well, that's crap. These are the same people that didn't like the horseless carriage when they came out in 1903 and 1905. People need to get out of the dark ages and accept this city and the airport the size that it is. So the community as a whole, if we could get all of them in a room at one time and talk about it, I think we got a lot of support. But there's a very apathetic bunch of people in Chandler. If it doesn't bother them, they don't talk about it. The ones that do bother them, they just raise a big stink about it. Mm-hmm. So the airport it's just an age-old constant problem. And if you have the support of the city, the people that own the airport and such, you have a lot less of a community problem because everybody's being communicated to and understand what's going on. If you don't have the support of your elected officials and your city employees to do the job, then the airport gets overshadowed by the negative things. So that's what's happened. Through the mid-90s, everybody was on board. In the late 90s, the support for the airport began to wane, and the thing is coming back and biting everybody in the bottom now is they're building houses like they were free, and there needs to be a whole lot more business, a whole lot more industrial. There needs to be things to bring money into the community. Very few places left to do that, relatively speaking, and the city has got to not let the community close to the airport or close to the factory or close to the railroad dictate what the city as a whole, the community, needs to do for its benefit.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So this kind of leads into the next question, which is one of our last ones. What makes the airport important to Chandler, in your opinion?
It's just like any other business. If you have a business that provides a product, provides a service, has employees, pays taxes, and does all the things, whether it be a service station on a corner or a boutique downtown, an airport is the same thing. It provides a particular service. That service is unique. Nobody else can do it. Usually only one place in town that'll do it, or you have to go to another city to do it. Chandler is growing with the industrial part, the technology parts, the freeway, the access to all over the valley, and as a result, the airport is part of that central catalyst, something that can make all those things work a little bit better. To a business moving to the town, if he goes in and moves to town and looks at, wants to move here for his business, he's going to look on the things that's going to affect his business and look at the advantages of living here. People look at an airport for two reasons. One, they might be pilots. They might want to know there might be transportation coming there. But also, people look at the airport as that central point as to how the city supports their community. I mean, it may sound a little silly that way, but if I'm coming to town and I see that I've got a good, strong support of the airport, something that's tough to deal with, and the city's behind that, then I know they're going to support my business. And if I see the city cowering to a few people, then I know, well, I don't know whether I want to deal with that. And so as the airport has a service, it has an image for the city of Chandler on whether they're progressive or not progressive. Right now, the airport shows a very negative, non-progressive stature for the city of Chandler. That hurts the whole community. Economic benefits is, people say, well, show me the economic benefit. Well, show me the economic benefit of the damn freeway, you know. You can't quantify it as such. The investment by the city in the airport, the infrastructure, the runways, the taxiways, the ground, the fencing, and all that stuff is paid for by the federal and state governments to the tune of 97.5%. The city of Chandler only has to come up with 2.5 cents, 2.5% on the dollar. And it's just as simple as that. You move $10 million at the Chandler airport, it costs $250,000 out of city money to do it. Now, the money that's coming from the state and federal governments to support the airport is not from taxpayers, it's from pilots and airline travelers who pay money into a fund. So the taxpayers aren't paying for the airport unless they use an airplane. The airport investment in the property is negligible, and the building of the runway, the building of the taxiway is negligible to the airport. How many of us would love to sit down and start a new business and have somebody pay for 95% of the building, 98, 70, whatever, to pay for the building so that I wouldn't have to worry about paying the building. All I could do is worry about making the business go. So the perception of the airport needs to be improved, and the benefit to the community, pure dollars and cents, return on investment is astronomical. Contribution to the community, both in dollars, jobs, and such, combined with the image the airport's going to provide the city to outsiders coming in, they can see the city is making the right progress. But there are people that will not move to Chandler now. We've talked to them in the last 6 months because the city is not behind their airport. And if they're not behind the airport, then I don't want to mess with it. Are you a pilot? No, I'm not a pilot. I just read about it.
What do you think is important to know or highlight about the history of our airport?
Say again?
What do you think is important to know or highlight about the history of our airport?
The history of it?
Yeah, if you're going to tell someone in the community about what's important about the history of this airport.
Well, I can't be positive on that. The airport from the beginning, up until 20 years ago, had a good, rich, colorful, growing history. And the history of the airport right now is very much in all of that going away, not physically going away, but the airport is in jeopardy of being able to do the job it's supposed to do. And it will be here after all the rest of us are gone. And the history of the airport needs to show the growth, show the progress, show where we were going, and it does have to reflect on a very clear change that we're going through in the last 15 years. And the history needs to look at what can we do to get back on track. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what I think. The history, You really can't be positive after 1988, 1999, or 2000.
Mm.
You can be positive on the extreme growth and takeoffs, landings. Everything was going great guns and we were going there, and if we had had that last little domino fall, finishing the runway out there, that would have been the last issue that'll ever come up on the airport. It's the only issue that's come up for 20 years. The only issue. It's been a little bit of runway length. Other than that, there hasn't been an issue one at the airport in 20 years. So we get rid of that issue, then we get back to doing our business, working our jobs, bringing people in.
Okay. So your very last question, we'll be done. You are pretty much steeped in aviation history and have been surrounded by it your whole life. What is it that you love about flying? What attracts you to that?
I still like the challenge of getting on an airplane and going flying and doing a good job. I don't want to give some BS statement like the movies, oh, he loves the freedom of flight and all that stuff, that crap. That's normal. I like seeing things, traveling, going places in the airplane. I like getting on an airplane and making it work and come back and it doing well. It's very, very personally rewarding to get in this airplane and make it perform for me and do a good landing, to go somewhere. It's very rewarding for me to take you for a ride and you say, wow, this is neat. That's what I get out of aviation. I've been a teacher all my life, teaching people how to fly. And the reward that I get out of seeing people enjoying flying, learning how to fly and coming back and telling me personally, what you guys taught me has been great. So that's what flying is to me, is passing on the legacy of aviation and flying in general. Me personally, I like to go fly because it takes a certain amount of challenge to do a good job. You can be stupid and still get away with it, but to do a good job. My biggest problem I'm finding out today, I'm 66 years old now, and I have to work 3 times as hard to do as good as I did 10 years ago. So I need to fly more often to get that skill level back up to where I like to see it.
Mm-hmm.
But flying is not freedom, it's not independence, it's the reward of doing a good job.
Mm-hmm. Does that translate into how you feel about this business that you...
Excuse me?
Does that translate into how you feel about this business that you operate?
100%. I am so tickled with what we put together, I could just scream. And it aggravates me to no end to have somebody a half a mile of the airport call me a baby killer. And that's happened. That's my community that I have to go. So, and I can't get the city of Chandler to defend it. So I'm not going to give up on this Chandler Air Service. And I don't think I'm going to give up on the airport anytime soon. But I am not going to let the legacy of 31 years go away because of a few people.
Mm-hmm. How do you think your dad would feel about what you've accomplished here?
I know how he felt. I was here already 2 or 3 years before he died. And the personal reward I got from him being proud of me was extremely clear. He'd be standing on a corner right now, come to the airport. He did, to a certain degree, what I've done. And absolutely no question. He would be just pleased as punch. And he drank an awful lot, and he'd be down at a bar right now bragging about it. So I think he would be very pleased. I know he was. My mother, the same. No negative feedback comes back to this family as a result of what we're doing.
Okay. All right, well, good. All right, I think we're done.
Okay, I need to go to the bathroom, go get a beer and a hamburger.
Yeah. That sounds pretty good, actually.
Yeah.
about.
Well, we're gonna clean this mess up, and I'm gonna take you down to, what's his face? Either Uncle Bear's or the pizza, you tell me.
Okay, I think I'd rather have pizza.
Okay.
All right.
I'll be over there here as quick as I can.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Do you still have a place called Uncle Bear's? Because I know that they changed.
There was an Uncle Bear's over around Warner and Cooper or somewhere like that.
Yeah.
And I've been there a couple of times